Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, am I excited about this episode today. Before I introduce you to our guest, here is a quote just for this episode. My best friend is a person who will give me a book I have not read. Abraham Lincoln, our guest today, is a very special person to the Culture Matters podcast, a very, very special person to me. If you've listened to this show before, you better have listened to these episodes that our good friend Eddy Perez Jr. is here today with us. Thousands of people have homeownership because of what Eddy and the team that he's curated over these many, many years as it relates to the mortgage industry. But beyond all of that, a steward of learning, a practitioner of discipline and respecting the game of entrepreneurship and business. And I can't think of another perfect person to wrap up the marathon of the New Year's Eve marathon of the Culture Matters podcast with. And so if you're listening to this in May of 2024 or June of 2025, know that it's New Year's Eve that we're recording this episode of the Culture Matters podcast. Eddy, thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And for those that can't, that are not aware, for those that can't, are not watching the YouTube, what type of commitment would you say it takes to perform on such a high level as it relates to getting something like this done on a Sunday with all the obligations that you have? What does it take mentally, right? How do you think to be such a high performing CEO?
Well, it all starts with desire. Desire is the seed of all action. And then you can have desire but not take action. And it pretty much boils down to that simplicity. Are you willing to do what it takes? Are you willing to take action? Not just talk, not just set up these lofty goals. I think, however, you do need to set your objectives really, really high, because what I've found is even if you miss them, you barely miss them. Aristotle had a great quote: I'd rather you aim high and miss than aim low and hit.
Wow. I didn't remember that was Aristotle. That's pretty amazing that was actually him that said that.
Yeah.
As it relates to 2023, where is somewhere you believe you showed up really strong?
Well, everything starts with self. If you can't really change the world if you don't change yourself, and you can't really change yourself unless you're willing to make the sacrifices and give up the things in the short term for long-term gain, even medium-term gain. Even, I don't think 30, 60 days is a long time. So even in short term, just not maybe immediate, I think the greatest thing I did in 2023 was, some people would probably argue which one it would be. I'll just say all three. I think the sacrifice of no bread, no potatoes, and no alcohol was pretty profound for myself, especially how much, I'm not a heavy drinker any longer. However, a beer, stuff like that here and there. Potatoes and bread were definitely staples of my lifestyle, I would say.
What type of practical impact would you say that had on the way that you thought or the way that you interacted with the work that you've done?
So here's what I found interesting. That it's kind of like, I don't want to use the word addiction. However, having once upon a time been very addicted to smoking cigarettes, I used to smoke pack and a half a day for 10 years and took 3 times to quit. And that was almost 20 years ago. February will be 20 years that I quit. However, it's it doesn't even touch my mind now, which is what I found interesting. Very similar to that experience was, you know, you get these cravings for foods, or, oh, I've had a rough day. I need to have a beer, or I need to have a drink, or I need to call up a friend and go have some drinks to blow off some steam. Once you've removed that out of your lifestyle, it's like it never almost didn't exist. Like, it doesn't even touch your head. You're not even thinking like, oh man, I need to go have a sandwich with a beer. Like, that just doesn't even hit your head with some French fries. That just doesn't, it's just not there. So what I found in practice is, once you sacrifice it after a certain time period, it becomes a lot more fluid and easier by far.
What are the consequences of, let's say, putting those back into the lifestyle for someone that has a lot of responsibility, right? Or things to be responsible for? What do you lose time?
Sure.
Do you lose productivity? How do you look at that?
Well, it's a good thing I don't know yet, because, I haven't brought those back in, and I already made a commitment for 24, no bread and no potatoes. I do plan on having a beer, because out of the three, that was something that I can have maybe, once a month, twice a month, that I actually enjoyed. So that's not really harmful. Plus, I do believe adding bread and potatoes back in, especially now with such of the evolution of what's going on with glucose in your body. And those are the two highest on the glycemic index of affecting your glucose. And now they're showing that, type 2, 95% of diabetes is type 2 diabetes. And the number one reason is not non-management of your glucose. And that also is what affects your energy levels. They're now saying that type 3 diabetes is why there's been such of an explosion in Alzheimer's. And I know from personal experience and dementia that, my mom has diabetes today, type 2, at an older age, and her memory, she's got definitely bouts of dementia. So there's probably something to that type 3 and energy management. I mean, that was one thing that truly affected Steve Jobs in the end with pancreatic cancer, was when he would go on these kind of crazy diets of just fruit, but fruit that was very, very high in sugar. And even if it's natural sugar, like anything, too much of one thing can deteriorate your body. So I pledged for 24, no bread and no potatoes. I mean, might as well keep that one going. That's not as crazy as it sounds. I didn't miss those two. A beer here and there, I'd have been like, wow. And not in a stressful situation, just more in a social gathering with very close, like strategic meetings away, sitting around the table, just chatting, just something to really enjoy in the moment. So I don't know. I guess I'll be able to answer this next year on New Year's Eve after I've had beer in my system.
What are you most apprehensive of for 2024?
Apprehensive in what sense?
Let's just say fearful.
What am I fearful for in 24? Well, I mean, a couple weeks ago, the Fed said they're going to cut interest rate 3 times. Not sure if that's, even though this is very controversial, what I'm going to say, not sure if that's in the best interest of the consumer. And the reason I say is, inflation, regardless of how you measure it, is a real thing. Now, is it because of price of tomatoes or some of those things compared to 15 years ago? But no, but I think there's no turning back the clock. Certain things just now, I don't see, even if things get cheaper, that a value meal at McDonald's goes down from $10 here in Atlanta, when just a couple years ago it was 5 or 6. I see that as an opportunity, that those price margins have now been baked in. And the only way to really reverse that is to get it slowly, to bring prices down. I don't want to say you have to trigger a recession, but you do have to make things more difficult. And if they're going to start cutting interest rates, not even 2 years in, They never really held strong. It's just, and I know that there's weakness and there's people in trouble. So I'm not saying I don't have that compassion. However, for the broader masses, sometimes a little bit of pain is necessary. And in this sense, that was really like heavy workouts, because that was just causing a little bit more expense and expense management, which is no different than a really, really hard workout. So this wasn't like you were tearing muscle. This was just sore muscles to make them stronger and bigger. So what am I fearful for? I fearful that the Fed will cut interest rates 3 times like they're projecting, if not 4. And we're going to go back, we'll be playing this song and dance in 27 or 28. It seems like there's always too much short-term focus, and I get it. Consumers are a lot more empowered these days with social, with cell phones, with just the advent of the internet, because that's all that is, and access to it. Even what we're doing right now, that I think it was too soon is what I would say. If we had held on another year, I think we'd be in a much better position for the long run.
What drives you to work so hard?
Well, I think like anything, it gives you a sense of purpose. And what I mean by that is, if you're doing something you really enjoy, if you're doing something that's making a difference, if you're more importantly doing something that impacts others beyond their greatest beliefs, if you've been given the gift to see how to transform others through your own transformation, because like I say, you can't change the world till you change yourself. The journey of entrepreneurship is not about what you can accomplish. It's about who you become in the process, and really seeing the version of yourself of who you truly were made to be, positive or negative. So a lot of the drive is, I believe that I hold a certain level of responsibility and duty, not just to my family, but to this country, as well as to humanity as a whole. I felt like my life has been a huge gift. I think my family's story and where we've come from and what I've seen and overseen myself and seen in others, I think it'd be a travesty if I didn't go as hard as I did, because that meant, especially 3 out of the 4 that believed in me the most are now passed away, that they basically died in vain. And there's a lot of mistakes I'll make over time. There's more mistakes I'll keep making. There'll be times that I need to get better. But one thing that I can tell you is I'm not going to let them die in vain.